Welcome to the Friends of Fantasy Benefits Baseball Podcast. I'm Justin Mason, lead fantasy writer and analyst at friendsoffantasybenefits.com. Joining me on this episode, as always on Monday nights, is Dave McDonald. How you doing, my friend?
Doing good, man. Just got back from Chicago yesterday, did our Glarf draft over the weekend, got to make our donation from Earth to the Lost Boys, Inc. in Chicago, got to hang out with some underprivileged children, throw a little pizza party, and had a great draft, hung out with everyone, and it was just it was an awesome time. I love Glarf, I love Earth. Hopefully all the other leagues have just as good of an experience.
Yep, we have the Barf draft coming up on Saturday. I am super excited. KDS ran today, so and I, of course, like a moron, forgot to set it. So it wouldn't have mattered. I got my 12. I got the 12th pick anyways, so I probably would have gotten exactly what I didn't want either way. So it worked out. Pick 12. I'm fine with it. But we are going to talk. We're going to do some news and notes stuff for a little bit, and then we're going to talk about main event prep, because today I have a fantastic guest who finished third overall in the 2022 main event. He was in 6 leagues last year, won 4 of them, and cashed in one of the other ones. It is Ben Tidd. How you doing, my friend?
Hey, Justin. I'm doing well. Glad to be on. Hi, Dave. Great to meet you guys finally.
Absolutely. Why don't you remind people where you can reach on social media, and then just talk about how amazing a year you had last year.
Well, on Twitter, my name is BreakingBen_T. And like we mentioned, we were talking about before, I definitely had the best year of my life last year in fantasy baseball. So it's probably one for the record books, but I'm trying to repeat, got to keep going. But yeah, I definitely had a good year, and I was very fortunate to do as well as I did. So
yeah, that is an absolute understatement. You are underselling yourself. Like I said, Ben was in 6 leagues on NFBC, won 4 of the 6. Including a main event, finished 3rd overall. He won his TGFBI league, finishing 33rd overall, and then won a draft champions and a main event qualifier. So on top of the fact you cashed huge in the main event, you've got a free main event entry this year as well. Yep. So it's how do you follow that up?
I have to win both mains now and come in first.
Yeah, right.
Sounds easy, right?
Yeah, exactly, right?
No problem. You got it.
Easy progression from 3rd place to 1st this year. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm gonna grill you about some main event questions so I can learn and try to unseat you. Though we won't be in the same league since you aren't coming to Vegas. But let's talk about some news and notes. We'll move through the news fairly quickly because this will be largely focused on prepping for kind of a main event leagues. Now, that's also applicable to other people's leagues. So I don't want you to be like, oh, well, I don't play in the main event, I'm not going to listen to this episode. You can take a lot of the lessons that we're going to be talking about today and apply it to your home leagues for sure. Let's start with Justin Turner, who got hit in the face and had to be sent to the hospital. Pretty ugly scene for the Red Sox 3rd baseman. Dave, are you moving him down your boards? Are you taking him off your board until we get more information? How are you adjusting to this news?
I'll be honest with you. I haven't really given it much thought. He wasn't really a big target for me this year. He's someone who I felt like I could draft late if I really needed a 3rd baseman. But I'll probably have to go back and look and see how long it took. Oh gosh, remind me, who was the guy who got hit in the face last year?
Oh God, I don't even remember.
What happened to Stanton 1 year too?
Yeah, it did happen to Stan.
It happened. It was someone else though. More recently, it was like maybe it was 2 years ago. I can't remember.
I'm remembering who you're. I remember the incident, but I can't remember who it was.
I'll have to see how long it took them to come back. But I mean that can have some reverberating consequences too. It's like lingering consequences, I guess you could say. Like it might take him a while to feel comfortable in the batter's box again. Might have concussion problems. I mean, man, it was brutal to watch. It just, you hate to see that happen.
Kevin Pillar.
Okay, that is right. I do remember that now. Yeah, so I'll have to look and see how long it took Pillar to come back from that. I don't recall and how he ended up doing after that. Not the Pillar and Justin Turner are comparable.
Delano DeShields a few years ago. when he had that huge swelling in his jaw.
Pilar was the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
It doesn't sound like he broke his jaw or anything, so hopefully it won't take. He did get 16 stitches apparently.
Oof,
so hopefully, obviously he's going to miss some time, may not be ready for the start of the season. Ben, are you kind of taking him off are you taking Justin Turner off your boards?
I was going to wait to see because I'm in the middle of a draft right now. I passed on him in TGFBI for Yandy Diaz, so I got lucky there. But I'm not drafting for a couple of weeks, so I have some time to wait and see what happens before I do anything.
Yeah, I think it's smart if you're drafting right now to kind of play the wait and see approach, see what if he's got a concussion, if there is any broken bones that are going to need surgery or anything like that. It's just smarter to avoid until we have a little bit more information. Jose Quintana has a rib stress fracture and is likely going to not be ready for the start of the season. This opens up the door potentially for David Peterson or Tyler McGill. Ben, are you interested in either of those guys?
Yeah, definitely. I would whoever replaces him, I think would be a good late round pick. I remember hearing people talking about Peterson recently, and I didn't grab him in DCs or anything. I'm kind of upset about because he was definitely the first guy to fill in for any of the injuries, and they're going to have some because of how old the rotation is. So I think he did pretty well last year. He's already been stretched out. He's done it for a couple of years now. I think he's a good fill in for them. Dave?
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to tell me twice to go after David Peterson. He's one of my favorites. If you're still, I don't know if people are still doing DCs, but if you are, I mean, he's a guy I would be drafting regardless anyways, because that rotation is definitely going to need help sooner than later, regardless of Quintana. So yeah, love Peterson. McGill, I don't know. I heard something about his velocity being way down. I don't know if either of you heard that. Is that true?
I haven't heard that. Yeah, but I mean, I know that there's been a lot of talk about he is likely not going to be even considered for the rotation, or at least early on in the season. That it's going to take him a while to stretch out.
Yeah, Peterson's definitely the interesting one for me right now.
Yeah, me as well. Like I had Peterson pretty high in my ranks back in October, but then they started signing all these guys, and it was like, oh, okay, it doesn't look like he's going to get an opportunity. Obviously, we knew there would be an opportunity at some point, considering that is like the oldest rotation in all of baseball, and it's not particularly close. Like Kodai Senga's like I think close to 30, and he's the youngest guy.
He's 30.
So he's 30. So he's the youngest guy in the rotation. So we knew Dave Peterson would get a shot at some point. Now's the time. So definitely go ahead and get your shares of David Peterson. Tony Gonsolin has sprained his ankle. He's day to day. Any concerns there, Dave?
I don't think so. Not unless, I mean, just no, because it's like we're still, almost a full month out from starting, and I can't imagine that holds him back too much. It's not an arm injury or anything like that, so I'm not really concerned.
Any concerns for you, Ben?
Not with it being an ankle. I know that I never realized he had the forearm issue last year, so that kind of knocked him down for me already. And I mean, this isn't encouraging if he's hurting his ankle now too. So. But yeah, like Dave said, if it's mild, then he's got a long way to go before he has to pitch. So shouldn't be.
Yeah, I'm not super worried about the ankle. I am a little bit worried about the forearm issues we saw last year. I don't know how you can give him more than like 130 innings in terms of your projections. So for me, I was probably already out on Tony Gonsolin considering the price right now. But this is just a little extra reason why I won't be drafting him. Yordan Alvarez may return next week, maybe. Ben, this is clearly a guy who would be going in the first round. It was going in the first round of TGFBI leagues in spite of the fact that he hadn't even picked up a bat in spring training. Where are you at on Yordan Alvarez?
Yeah, I'm kind of going back and forth right now. My initial thought was to move him into the second round, early second for now, just try to get some of those safer bats ahead of him. But we'll talk about this later when we talk about the main event. But I had him last year, and he had this last year, and it was kind of scary because he didn't play for a week or two, and his power kind of got sapped. So it's kind of discouraging when he comes into spring training. He's got the same issue again. So I'd definitely be cautious if you're going to take him in the first round until he starts playing.
Dave?
Yeah, so initially when I heard about this, I kind of put it out there that I wasn't really concerned, and then I started engaging with a lot of other people who were telling me about what their concerns were. And then I was reading some other articles that I hadn't read yet. And there was something saying like, he was saying how all he needs is rest. And I'm thinking, well, you had this issue last year. You had an entire off season of rest. If that's not enough, this is not good. So yeah, I'm kind of off of him, which sucks because I really like, he was a big target for me this year. I really wanted to draft some Yordan Alvarez. He's part of the reason I wanted the 8th slot in the Glarf draft was I figured I could get him there. And yeah, I'm kind of changing lanes now. I don't even know if I feel comfortable with him in the second round, honestly. I think you could. I don't think this is like if you push me for an opinion, I'm going to say I don't think it's going to like be a major issue for him in season, but I'm concerned that it keeps popping up, and it's a thing. So I guess we have to treat it as such.
He's on my do not draft list at this moment until we see him actually like playing, swinging in games, making contact. I'm not going to gamble with it. It's too early of a pick to be risking potentially, him missing half the season because of this or something. I could look really silly. I was talking to my co-host on Sleeper the Bus, Paul Spohr, earlier today, and I was talking about an article that I'm prepping for Fantasy Pros called This Year's Aaron Judge. And the premise of it is I faded Aaron Judge, was very vocal about fading Aaron Judge last year. And then he went out and had just a historic fucking season and made me look silly. And Yordan Alvarez will be on that article of a guy that I'm completely fading that could easily come out and make me look silly. If he hit 50 home runs with like a 300 batting average, it would not surprise me at all. But I just think it's a bad premise to just be like, well, I'm just going to ignore the warning signs that we are seeing, because until he picks up a bat, like you can't hit home runs unless you're swinging. So.
But then even if he does pick up a bat and swing it and get some hits, are we confident that it's not going to come back? Because I mean, it came on last year in like August or something like that. So I mean, how do you even know that even if he looks okay, that it's not going to be not okay later? And I mean, Aaron Judge, historic season. It did help a little bit having the super happy fun ball while all the other teams had the dead ball. So, I mean, little small asterisk here, but and the complete power outage around the league made it look like he was just a monster comparative.
Yeah. All right. Mike Moustakas signs a deal to go to Colorado in the wake of the Rockies likely losing Brendan Rodgers for the entire season because of a dislocated shoulder. That's going to need surgery. Rodgers is getting a second opinion, but it sounds like his season is probably already done before it's gotten started. Ben, any interest in Mike Moustakas?
Yeah, I think so. Now with the shift ban, he can't really. I don't know if he can play second base because I don't think he's the most mobile guy. So I mean, if he's going to play either, he's probably going to DH or maybe play third, and then McMahon will go to second. But I don't know if they want to move McMahon off the third. So. I have to wait and see where they're going to play him, and if he's is he guaranteed a contract? He's probably.
It is a minor league deal, yeah.
Yeah, so if he doesn't even make the team, then there's no point. But definitely intriguing. I mean, but also I don't think he's kind of at the end of the rope. I think he hasn't really been good in a couple of years, so he may have another new life going to Colorado, but maybe like a 30th round pick or something in a 15-teamer might make sense if he's still there. But
Dave. First and third eligibility playing in Colorado.
Yeah.
You want Mike Moustakas?
I mean, I think, he's a guy you can have some interest in for the weeks that they're playing in Coors. I think he could be a streamer. I don't think he's going to be a guy that you end up keeping, though, for sure. Like, he's a guy you stream and then probably dump when they have a long road trip coming up. My thought is that from everything that I'm hearing, and I could very well be wrong, but it seemed like they were leaning towards going Trejo at second, leaving McMahon at third, and then I'd imagine they just DH Moustakas. Like, it's not like they have a strict DH there that they have to play there. So I feel like he'd probably be just their DH, no?
I mean, I think he'll probably play a little bit of third, play a little bit of first, and then DH. But I mean, they like to DH Blackman quite a bit, considering he's like 74 years old. So, yeah, I think he's going to get enough playing time to matter in fantasy if he can stay healthy. And that's a big if, because he's really, really struggled with staying on the field recently. I think of like one of your last two picks in a fab league. It needs to be a fab league. don't be drafting him because he could easily get DFA'd tomorrow. And if you take him in the draft and hold, now you've got a dead spot, on that 50-man rosters. And those dead spots pile up pretty quickly once you start getting to June, July, and August. So I would say, last pick in a deep fab league, take a gamble, or he becomes, in your shallower leagues, he's probably a streaming target when they're at home. Nick Gordon got a high ankle sprain. I was watching this live when it happened. It didn't seem so bad at first. Dave, do you even care about Nick Gordon now?
I mean, I ended up drafting him in both Glarf and TGFBI like way, way late, like in like the 24th, 25th round, something like that. We're still 3 weeks away. We'll see. I don't know if this will just be like permanently putting a stop to his potential running or, when he does come back, I don't know. So I figured it was worth the gamble upside at that point. And if he could very well be a week 1 drop. So certainly not a target for me right now, but I'm not completely ruling him out yet.
What about you, Ben?
I agree with Dave. Other thing, I was just looking at the Twins depth chart and roster resource before we got to him, and he's projected to hit lower in the order. So, I mean, his upside was kind of capped already, hitting down there. So this doesn't really help too much. I mean, once he comes back from this, I'll definitely be interested. I don't know about drafting him yet, but if he does fall late in drafts, then he might be a good buying opportunity.
What about Edward Julian? I wonder if this increases his chances of making an impact off the bat.
Probably not. Julian's a really interesting guy, and I think in on-base percentage leagues, he makes a lot of sense. His problem is like the opposite problem that you see for most prospects when they first come up, is he's too passive. I mean, dude has like 20% walk rates, and pitchers are going to have a book on that, and they're going to attack him in the zone. And so it'd be really interesting to see if he's going to be able to actually swing, because that is his problem, is he doesn't like to swing. He likes to just walk. We saw him down at the Arizona Fall League this year, and he was in the home run derby, and everybody was like, this is going to be the first walk you ever see at a home run derby. So, and I don't even know if he hit a home run. It was a weird selection for him to even be in the home run derby. But I guess he could. I mean, they've also got Austin Martin. Jorge Polanco has yet to play in a game. So
they're riddled. They're riddled.
Kirilloff and Byron Buxton have yet to play in a game. If you were thinking that Minnesota's offense was going to be good this year,
not to mention Jose Miranda. Yep. Yeah. Their whole offense.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if they bring back Miguel Sano or something. So I wasn't really interested in Nick Gordon to begin with. So I'm still not interested. So Logan Gilbert been working on a new split change. Any interest there, Ben?
Did Ben get frozen?
Did we lose Ben? All right, Dave. Any interest in?
I think I'm back.
Interest in Logan? Oh, there you go.
He's back.
I was asking about Logan Gilbert and his new split change. Any interest there?
I've been kind of down on Logan Gilbert. I feel like he got kind of lucky last year, but I mean, if this split change ends up helping him out, maybe I'll be interested, but I don't think I'll be drafting him too much just where I have him in my rankings. So, I mean, he could prove me wrong, but I don't know if I'll draft him unless he falls, which I know people do like him, so I probably won't have too many shares.
Dave?
I mean, I'm always interested in new pitches, but as we know, sometimes it's a lot much to do about nothing. Like sometimes they'll say that they're working on something, but then they won't actually throw it in real games, or they'll throw it like 5% of the time or something. So I do think that particular pitch is interesting because he could probably get a lot of swings and misses on that. He could definitely use another pitch like that. I think Ben's right. I think he did get a little lucky. I am generally pretty high on Logan Gilbert in terms of he as a prospect, he was very, very intriguing, great control and everything. Just think we still need to see a little bit more from him. So I don't know. This is something that I'm taking into consideration. I'm curious to see how he uses it in spring.
I like Logan Gilbert. Screw you guys. He's a guy with 3 good pitches, good command and control. Doesn't walk guys, doesn't give up home runs, in a great park, on a great offense. This is this isn't going to like move him, like unless we start seeing him throw it like 15% of the time or something like that in spring training, where I start going, okay, he's really going to use this as like a big part of his arsenal. Like it doesn't move things for me. Like we see this all the time with like new pitches where guys are like, oh, I'm throwing this slider, or I'm the one this year is the sweeper, right? Everybody's throwing a fucking sweeper this year. And you know, they're going to throw it like once or twice in spring training. And then by the time we get to the regular season, they're not throwing it. So unless the guy is really working on it a lot in spring, I usually don't pay too much credence to the quote unquote new pitch in spring training. I think often it's just a lot of smoke. Josiah Gray throwing a new cutter. I feel the same way about Josiah Gray throwing a new pitch. It's just another thing to get a home run off of. So, Dave, any interest in Josiah Gray throwing a new cutter?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, look, if we're just going to rule out every young pitcher who struggles in their first year, you're going to rule out a lot of really good pitchers. You know, John Legaza put out a stat on February 27th. He said only 9 starting pitchers in MLB had a forcing fastball with greater than or equal to 13 inches of vertical movement and 9.5 inches of horizontal movement. It was like Cole, DeGrom, Verlander, McClanahan, Hunter Green, Gaussman, Kopech, and then Josiah Gray. Oh, and Cutter Crawford too. Sorry. But yeah, no, I mean, I think
that was the Cutter Crawford tweet. That was not a Josiah Gray tweet.
I mean, I'm very interested. I think the kid is very talented. I think he just has to learn to stop giving up the home runs, and a cutter would be a good way to start doing that. Because if he can get away from you know, the fastball a little bit and throw a cutter that can maybe keep the ball on the ground a little bit more when he has to give up some contact, because he gets the swings and misses. So I don't know. I'm interested.
Are you interested, Ben?
Yeah, at the right price. If he's late enough in the draft as like an upside play, I'd be willing to take him, give him a second chance.
Yeah, I mean, I guess is like one of your last picks. Washington does not have an easy schedule to start, and so like I think you're more than likely going to be getting a guy like Josiah Gray off the waiver wire anyways, sometime like in late April, early May, because they've got a trip to Colorado. They're playing Baltimore at home. They have, I think they've got 2 series against Atlanta and 1 against Philadelphia. Like they've got a pretty rough schedule to start the season. So I think most of the Washington pitchers, unless you're really high on someone like maybe Mackenzie Gore or something, you can probably mostly leave them on the waiver wire and pick them up after they get destroyed early on in the season.
What if he doesn't get destroyed earlier in the season, though?
Then you miss out. How confident are you going to be starting him in any of those locations? Maybe you start him home versus Baltimore.
I don't. You don't have to draft him at a spot where I have to start him. So why do I have to start him?
You don't have to, but
right.
Like I want like most of my options to be somewhat startable. What if like, you know, like for instance, like in TGFBI, I drafted Joe Musgrove and the news came out he broke his toe. Well, now I've got one less bench option for my pitchers because I'm just got to hold him on my bench. Like I'm getting I'm one more injury away from like, yeah, I'm starting pretty much every guy on my pitching staff. And that can happen really quickly in, you know, especially a 15-team league. So like, while you don't have to have all your guys be startable necessarily, you don't want to be sitting a starting pitcher that you drafted on that you're going to be sitting on your reserve list for the first month of the season.
Well, not the first month, but maybe the first 2 or 3 starts. There's nothing wrong with that. See what you got. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. I mean, you're going to miss out on a lot of young potential stars if you just have if I'm not going to start them, I'm going to not draft them philosophy.
I think I'm going to pick him up after you drop him.
I don't think you will, but we'll see.
I think I will. All right, we'll see. Adam Wainwright's velocity is down over 4 miles an hour, 4.3 to be exact. Dave, how excited are you to draft Adam Wainwright?
So you know our boy Jake, of course, still drafted Wayno in Glarf. It's his boy, so he's
going to get like 16 wins. Yeah, of course he did.
You know, look, it's kind of like Zach Greinke, you know. I don't know if he's just fucking with the batters. I don't know if he's even trying right now. You know, or maybe he's finally reached the end of his journey. I'm not sure. I think he's okay if you want to take him late and just stream him for a couple starts or see how he looks first. But obviously, this is not encouraging to see. Obviously, not a guy you have to draft highly, but I would rather take darts on higher upside guys like Josiah Gray than Waino.
Ben,
I wasn't really in on Wainwright for whatever reason going into spring training. I mean, since he's a veteran, this could be like what Chris Bassett's doing. I don't know if you guys saw what Rob DiPietro shared the other day. He was saying, or the reporter was saying, how he's doing it intentionally, just trying to try things and build his stamina up. So, I mean, I could see him doing the same thing, but I had him on a team last year and he kind of slowed down late in the season. So I wonder if he's just at the end now. So, I mean, if you need like a 9th starter or something, maybe, but I might pick someone with more upside potentially.
NHP Nob says in the chat, Wainwright was starting 88 last spring. Yeah, this is, I mean, guys like Wainwright and Greinke, like they don't really care about spring training. They're just trying to get out
there. Is 88? Isn't that what he normally throws now though? Isn't that his fastball speed?
No, doesn't he usually throw like 90?
I don't think so. I don't know. I could be wrong.
I could be wrong as well.
What was he down to? What was the 4.3 down to?
I don't know if Dave was the one who put it in
the. Yeah, I mean, like, he was throwing 88.6 last year.
Oh, okay, so he's down to 84. Okay. Ooh.
Yeah. So 88 last spring means that is his normal speed.
Yeah.
It's like Rich Hill.
It is like Rich Hill. I mean, here's the thing, like I'm sure he'll probably end up just being fine. I think the only reason you're getting the only reason you should be drafting Wainwright is that if he's like your 6th or 7th pitcher, or maybe even 8th or 9th starting pitcher in a draft champions. Like you just want a guy who's going to go out there and pitch innings and be healthy. I don't know that you want a guy like Wainwright in a regular Fab league.
Just take a better shot. You know, like the upside on Wainwright, even if he's okay, is not high. Go for some. I mean, he's a streamer. You can pick up guys like him.
He's a guy you stream for wins because he's on the Cardinals, and the Cardinals are going to win a lot of games.
Take more upside shots late. There's no reason to take a guy like that.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about kind of prepping for main events. And I'm going to do most of the asking, and I'll let you guys do most of the answering since I have not had as much success as you guys in the main event. So I'll start with you on this one, Ben. How do you begin your prep for a main event that might be different than just your average league?
Well, the main thing that I did last year with the main event, it was my second year doing it, and I didn't do this the first year, was I kind of mapped out my draft. I went through the first 15 rounds or so, maybe 17, and I wrote down who my ideal target was for each pick, a fallback option, and then like a safety option. I had 2 fallbacks, 2 safeties for each pick, plus the target. And that just kind of gives me an idea going into the draft who I'm looking at. It's like in the back of my mind almost. I'm not like following it as I'm drafting. I just like kind of write it down and I think about it, and then it's kind of there. And I actually it really helped a lot last year. Looking back at my draft, I was able to draft a bunch of the guys I was targeting. And of course you have to pivot in any draft, but that was one thing that really helped me plan out my draft, trying to figure out, okay, where do I want to target pitching, saves, catcher? Because in a main event, you're going to get sniped. There's going to be closer push-up. So even if you plan for your closers, you're probably going to be off by the targets. So that's, and I know other people have talked about that too. I know Jenny Butler does a pretty in-depth planning process for her drafts. And I never thought to do it before, but this is stuff I'm going to do it again for my 2 mains this year. And I'm not going to go like by the book when I do it, but it's just something in there as a guide.
What about you, Dave? What's different for you? Like, let's say difference between Glarf and a main. Like, how are you prepping differently for those?
I mean, I don't really. They're both similar. They both have the overall title, which is what I'm. Any competition that has an overall component to it, the only reason you're playing it is because you want to go for that overall. It doesn't mean that you blindly only go after that the whole year. If you have to make adjustments in the season, you do. But obviously, if you want a higher, ROI, you're going to be playing in like a super or something or some other league where you can, like, just winning the league, you get more money for. I'm playing in the main events and I'm playing in Earth to try to win the overall. So I go to them, attack them both the same way. And much like Ben does, I've been doing the same thing for years where I write down I write down my pick numbers on the left column, and at the top I have every position. And then for each pick, I do it by position. So catcher, first, second, third, short, outfield, pitcher, closer. And I put down my targets for every round that I'm going for. And then, like Ben does, I don't just have like 2 backups or whatever. Sometimes it'll be like, there'll be 9 options at that pick. Other times I'll have like 3. And then, if I have to jump someone up, I can jump someone up or people fall and whatnot. But I always have that list to draft off of. So I'm always keeping track of, okay, if I don't take my second baseman here, I look down the list. Okay, where would be the next spot? And then if I take him at that spot, what other guys would I be drafting him over that I need to push other guys up? Or, you have to constantly be aware of your resources that you need, your steals, your homers, your saves, your positions that you need, like Ben mentioned, your catchers, and then that's how I prepare for mine. I do the same thing. I even do all 30 rounds. Actually, I don't just do the first 15. And you can't plan it all out. It's going to go according to plan necessarily, but you can have those targets ready that you're looking at each spot, and then kind of formulate your draft plan based on that.
What materials do you like use? Like when you sit down, like I know Ben does the online, so we'll tackle him there in a second. But like you sit down live and draft. What materials do you have in front of you when you're sitting down at your live draft there, Dave?
I've got a co-drafter for the main event. For Glarf, it's just me, but for the main event, I've got Tony with me. And then I've got I keep my forecaster there just if I need to quickly look up something to talk about with him or whatever. We've got our draft sheets, we've got our ADP sheets that Tony builds in Excel, a sheet where you keep track of all the picks, and when you take one off, it takes them off of all of the positions and everything. He's a whiz with Excel, thankfully, because I would not know how to do that otherwise. So we've got and I also have just like a notebook too, where I'm writing down stuff as the draft's going along. Like I'm writing down my targets for coming up. I have that all written down. So we've got the laptop and the forecaster and the notebook. And I think that's pretty much all my materials. And then usually I've got a beer or 4 at the table. So, just for a little, takes the edge off a little bit.
What about you, Ben? I know you aren't doing the live events. You drafted your leagues online. You're going to do that again this year. So how does it differ for you? Like, what do you have in front of you when you're drafting? So
I think I'll print out what I call my roadmap of my picks, just so it's there in case I want to reference it. I might print out all the closers, and I'll just keep track of all the closers because the other thing, and I also have 2 computers open. One screen is the draft room, and the other one is my Excel spreadsheet that I make and to prep for. And I also track the picks in that as I'm going along, and I track my team targets and their projected stats. So
nice. Yeah, I have my draft software, and then I also have like paper copies of pretty much my ADP and as well as a closer chart, because like for my ranks, like the way my projections run out, like I would never get a closer from the dollar values that it spits out, because it's all way below what the kind of the market rate is on NFBC. So I make sure I have paper copies, everything on top of having my computer in front of me as well. Is there an advantage to drafting online as opposed to live? Ben, you were online last year, finished 3rd overall, and Dave and I kind of looked and we saw there were only 4 teams in the top 25 of the overall that drafted either in New York or Vegas or Chicago. So do you think there's a distinct advantage from drafting at home in front of a computer as opposed to live in a room?
Well, everyone's different. At least for me, it's definitely a lot more relaxed, and there's no distractions really. So I can kind of be like in a zone for the entire 2 or 3 hours, however long it takes. I've done live football drafts, which are like home leagues. So I've been in that environment, but it's, I mean, like much lower stakes. I'd probably be pretty nervous if I was in Las Vegas trying to draft with everybody else in the room, all these excellent players around me. So I don't know. I kind of just like being in my own little spot and no distractions.
Dave, what do you think? I mean, I think it's pretty clear Dave thinks there's an advantage to drafting at home as opposed to having live.
Yeah, I mean, for several reasons. I mean, first of all, I mean, and I do, you know, I have non-live drafts, of course. You know, I do. I mean, last year both the Super and the Ultimate were both online for me, as opposed to the main event, which was live. So like online, you know, you can have 2-3 monitors where you can have all your information up and everything, and you can look stuff up quickly. It's a lot tougher when you're at the draft table and in a small allotment of space with a little laptop. You know, it's little. No, I know a lot of you use laptops, so maybe it's not as big of a deal for you, but I'm a desktop guy. So for me, it's definitely a lot easier to have all my stuff open on the desktop and everything. But more than that, it's just that you're going to have more, the talent level, the competition level is going to be higher with the live drafts in general, because at least in Vegas, you've got all the best players in the world go to draft live, and they're all, you know, everyone talks about leagues of death. They're all leagues of death. Like, you're never going to get a live Vegas draft main event where you don't have at least like 6 guys who are really, really good and who have either won leagues before or, you know, are Hall of Famers or whatever. Like, there's so many good players there. So if you want to avoid those, it's not that they don't always also draft online, but there's just a lower concentration of them online. And there's plenty of really good online players too. But if I was going to guess which is going to win the overall, I would always guess it's probably going to come from an online league.
And I mean, I tend to agree with you that I think that there are just, I think a lot of the really, really good players, not that there are, you know, that many bad players playing main events. I think, you know,
Sure.
if you're going to be spending $1,700 on leagues,
well, there are, and we know some of them.
Sure, but I think the vast majority of them at least think that they're pretty good at fantasy if they're spending $1,700 on a league. My only, I think, argument, I think there is an argument to be said that like the live drafts are more difficult. It is a much more difficult environment just generally. There, you know, typically you're in a room of 4 other drafts or 7 other drafts, depending on the year. And that adds to distraction levels. You know, the level of competition is really, really good. And
you know, you just made a good point too. When you hear someone else's name called, like, you're like, oh God, please don't say, you know, you're waiting to draft, you know, Kyle Schwarber. And then you hear at another table, Kyle Schwarber, then people start thinking about it at your table too. That happens a lot, which
it becomes
really
a much
sucks.
bigger issue in the last 15 rounds when you start hearing like someone like, you know, yell out like, you know, a sleeper pick of yours, you know, because they're 2 rounds ahead of you. And you're like, oh God, hopefully no one now takes him because they just heard that name. So I do think there is a little bit greater difficulty level. But I think it begs the question, because Dave, you said, and I've heard you say this before, like you enter these main events wanting to win the overall, right? The ROI isn't good enough on just an online. So if you think it's easier to win from an online, then why do you do your main in Vegas?
Because I'm addicted to the live draft is really what it is. I love being in Vegas with the best players in the world and drafting against them. And, you know, if you're, it's not like you can't win live, your chances are lower, but you know, I'm just willing to take that risk. It's just more fun.
Okay. I just thought that was an interesting, interesting question.
Yeah.
Because you know, if it's easier to win online and you want to win, you probably should be drafting online. But I agree. I mean, I'm not going to Vegas to watch everybody else draft. I'm going to Vegas to draft myself as well.
100%.
So, let's talk about KDS. You know, do you have a kind of KDS strategy, Ben? Do you have a preference this year on where you would prefer to draft in a main event? I know I've been targeting a lot of the middle, just because I feel like there is kind of a concrete like top 7 or 8
6
players.
Oh, you think 7 or 8?
Yeah, especially once you start moving up the starting pitchers into that because I think by the time we start drafting mains in the, at the end of the month, Burns and Cole are going to be in that conversation. So I think when
I'm seeing a definitive top 6. Who do you have at 7 and 8?
Is Ohtani part of your top 6?
No, not in terms of what other people think. No.
Okay, so Ohtani's part of my top 6, or a part of. Well, I think he's part of my top 5 or 6.
Okay.
And so then the consensus top 5, Jose Ramirez, Trey Turner, Ronald Acuna, Julio Rodriguez, Aaron Judge,
Kyle Tucker. So those are the top 6, and then you said that Ohtani would be in there for you. And
Ohtani's in it for me, and I think Burns is in there for me as well.
Oh wow, okay, all right.
So Ben, do you have a KDS preference in terms of generally how you approach KDS, and then where your kind of preferred spot might be this year?
Yeah, I'm still trying to work through that. I've been lucky enough so far. I've drafted 1st, 5th. I've drafted 9th, 10th, and 11th, and then 15th in my drafts this year so far. So I've tried out all different spots I possibly could. And it seemed when I drafted 1st and last, I didn't really like the turns following that. I didn't like the hitters there. And my initial drafting philosophy this year was to try to target hitters early, which like most people seem to be doing also. So I might have to pivot depending on how things shake out when the mains come around. But last year in my main event, I drafted 1st, and it seemed like there were more hitters last year. There was like Yordan going around the 2-3 turn. So I mean, it all depends on the player pool. I might just do 1 through 15, just because I think having Jose Ramirez at third base with the steals is so valuable. You can be pretty flexible with the rest of your draft right away, or if just even though people think the steals would be higher, you still need more steals to compete if there's more steals in the environment. So like you can't just disregard steals. So just having someone like Julio or Trey Turner, I think it's valuable having that earlier pick, but I don't know if I'm going to do like a 6-5, 4-3-2-1 type deal, and then figure out the rest after that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, the middles are good too. I don't really care about missing out on runs. Because you can start a run on being on the corners because you get 2 picks in a row. So you have the cherry pick. It's a different kind of drafting when you're on the ends.
Yeah. Get your
ADP.
guys.
Yeah, ADP doesn't really matter too much.
Right.
As long as someone's in the round, it kind of makes sense to take them whenever you want to. So yeah, I might. For now, I'll probably do 1 through 15, but that might change.
What about you, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I really like, like Ben said, I really want Jose Ramirez because third base plus steals is just so huge. I was a big proponent of Trey Turner for years, being the number 1 overall pick. I don't really want him as much this year because I feel very comfortable getting my shortstop later. And I would just rather have the upside of like an Acuna or Julio Rodriguez or even Aaron Judge, frankly, or Kyle Tucker. And actually, for me, I think that Bo Bichette should be in the middle of the first round. I think he's got a good average base. He can hit. He's got the power to hit 30+ homers and steal 25+ bases. He's talked about running more this year. I just think he's solid all the way around. I don't like starting with the shortstop, but if I'm drafting late, I like him and I like Mookie Betts. But yeah, like the first 6 would be ideal. 7 and 8. You mentioned Shohei Ohtani. I'm good with him too. I'm just kind of avoiding like Witt, Vlad, and Soto in that middle range. But I do love being in the middle because I feel like the most value falls to you there and you can be the most flexible. You're not going to miss out on as many runs from the middle. I don't really like the approach from the ends, but it's cool to take 2 guys that you want at the same time. I like that aspect of it, but I just overall tend to want to be closer to the middle.
Yeah, I mean, I've been drafting a lot from the middle this year. Unfortunately, unlike Ben, I have not had like a really good luck in terms of like getting my KDS spread out a good amount. So I have not drafted in the top 6 yet this year, except for my online championship draft. I drafted 1, but that's a 12-teamer, so it doesn't really help me in terms of getting ready for the main. I think I'm going to try to draft kind of towards the middle back. So probably like 10, 11, 12. So I'm drafting from 12 in barf. So I think it'll be a nice little practice to see if that's actually where one. I feel like there's like like I said, a distinct like top 8, top 7, top 8 for me. And I think there's a chance that I can get one of those guys potentially at 12. And I think there is a distinct drop off around like 25, 26 in that second round, kind of to the rest of the field. So if I can get 2 of my top 25, 2 of my top 26, I'm feeling pretty good about the start of my draft and being able to build from there.
I think a way of putting it is if you want 2 hitters, you probably want to draft near the end of the first round, because then you get the earlier the teens guys like the third baseman, which are really valuable. If you want to go hitter pitcher, then probably you want to draft in the front of the first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got JTR and Goldie there too in the early second if you want them.
Yeah, right. I was pretty stoked my Ohtani JTR start in TGFBI this year. So, and it's been a pretty common start for me. How important is ADP for the main events? I mean, we hear it all the time that guys are aggressive, the drafters are aggressive, and kind of quote unquote throw ADP out the window during the main events. I think that's kind of hyperbolic at best. I think a lot of people still are using ADP, but Ben, how important is ADP for you for the main events?
It depends on where you are. So if you're prepping for the main event, it's very valuable. I alluded to my roadmap earlier, and I use the main event at ADP. That's why I like to draft later online. So I want to get all the ADP from the live events, see where people are going, just use as much information as I can. And so I have my target, and then when I have what I'm calling my fallback option, I believe is how I termed it. My safe pick. So for my safe pick, I take my draft pick and I filter out by everyone's max pick based on my pick. So if no one's going where I'm picking up to a point so far where I'm picking, then I'm going to say, okay, well, they probably won't be there when it comes to my turn to pick. So then I go from all the people with max picks, at least my pick or higher in a larger number. And then that's how I kind of go from there. And then for the fallback option, I do based on the min pick. So if someone's at the minimum going where I'm picking, I'm going to say, okay, well, there's a chance that they could be gone by the time I'm drafting. So then it makes the number of players available even smaller when you go off the min, setting it equal to your pick. So that's how I make the list, and that worked last year.
That's pretty cool. And then, I like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, I wanted to play it safe because I don't want to be picking 5 guys who are going to be everyone's favorites, and then when they're all gone, I'll be like, okay, so what am I picking then? And then also while you're drafting, I have a column where it shows like the delta between my rank and then the ADP. And this year I have it, so it's kind of like dynamic. So as people are getting picked, it's going to update the delta based on whether the ADP is smaller or the number of picks so far is smaller. And then so like if I have someone kind of ranked lower than ADP, but if he's still on the board and like the picks are going off the board, he may end up being a value at that point, as opposed to just having the static. Okay, I have him ranked 50th, ADP is 25. It's going to show minus 25, but if 49 picks are done, he's still there. He's at -1. So maybe it makes sense to take him later than when I would have thought going into the draft.
That's something I've been wanting to incorporate into Tony's spreadsheet. I'm glad you just described it, because that's exactly what I've been looking for, and I'll have to see if he can do something like that, because that's really interesting. Are you also like an Excel wizard? Like, can you do this design your own draft sheets kind of thing to update like that?
Yeah, I use Excel at work all the time. So
okay,
I'm lucky in that respect.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I mean, just man, if there's one class that people should all take, in school if they can, it's like, how to use Excel to a high degree, because man, it's so useful in so many facets of life, but especially in the fantasy baseball industry, it's like the one thing that I really, really wish I knew how to do better. Thankfully, I have a friend who does, but this will be kind of cool to work on it more myself as well.
Yeah. What about you, Dave, in terms of like ADP? Like, how important is it to you when you're drafting a man?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely important as like a base. You can't go completely on it. Like, don't like say, okay, I can't take this guy here. If there's a guy that you really need to get, and his ADP suggests that he should be there for you next time, I kind of look at it as, if there's not a guy that I have to have at this pick and I need to get that guy, I'm going to take him early. I'm going to make sure I do what's best for my team, but at the same time, it's good to know in general where people go. But you got to just be careful not to use it as a evaluation system. You don't want to say, well, this guy's still on the board. at pick 120. He should have been off the board at like 95. He's falling, so clearly I should take him. I fall like that trap is. It's very often a trap. Like there's often guys who fall for a reason. They're overvalued earlier in draft season and whatever, and then people just draft them because they're like, oh, it makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside to draft the guy whose ADP is much higher. But just don't do it. Don't use this evaluation system. Make sure you're taking guys that you believe in, that you think that you have valued correctly according to your own valuation. So it's definitely good to be aware of the ADP and follow along that way, but just don't have that influence your picks directly.
Absolutely. There was I used to have a writer at and podcaster Friends of Fantasy Benefits who had done pretty well in the online championship kind of leagues and format. And he used to say, never forget that ADP weighs the first place and last place team the same. So like ADP is built through just as many 15th place teams as it is first place teams. It is a guide for you to understand where guys could be going in the draft, but it is not what you should be basing your draft upon. And one of the things I've really started doing, and kind of brings us to the second half of this question, which is at some point you just ignore ADP completely. And one of the things I did in my TGFBI draft, and I really trying to do this year, is that after a certain point in the draft, and it's usually about halfway through, I don't care about ADP anymore. Like I'm purely drafting based on what my valuations say. And not to say that I'm not necessarily doing that the entire way through, but I'll play more ADP games a little bit earlier. If I say, hey, I think this guy's a first rounder, but I'm pretty sure I can get him in the fourth, and maybe I'll just take him in the third. Yeah. I'm not going to take him in the first or second round. But after round 15, I threw ADP out the window for my TGFBI draft, and I really liked the way my draft finished. Ben, at what point, or is there a point in which you go, screw ADP, I'm just doing what I want to do?
Yeah, so I would say probably I agree with you, like at that midpoint in the draft probably, and then as you get in later rounds, at that point it's like a free for all. Mm-hmm. But even like so, it depends on if I'm doing a slow draft or like a main event where it's timed. Because in a slow draft, I mess with ADP too often. I try to see, okay, can I wait on this guy an extra round, and then if I have a minute to decide in a live draft, I can't do that. I can't play that game. So for like the main event, I want to have my rankings adjusted to ADP if I feel I need to. Otherwise, I'm just going to go off my list, and I've already looked at ADP going into the draft, and then I've made adjustments based on that. But while I'm drafting, I don't want to be thinking about ADP. I want to be thinking about who I'm going to take next and who I want to take now. So it's you don't want to get help. You don't want to hold like focus on it while you're drafting, because you're going to time out probably if you try to do that.
Dave?
Sorry.
I was asking you, like, at what point do you throw in the ADP just straight out the window?
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, more or less, I would say the last 10 rounds more than 15, but, whatever you want to do at that point. But I just more look at it as if there's two guys that I have valued somewhat equally, then like, okay, I'll take the guy who's been going higher earlier than the other guy. But you also have to be aware of like those buzz guys, those guys who are flying up boards, your Taylor Wards and stuff like that. You got to know that those guys are almost always going to go ahead of their ADP, like, because everybody's thinking the same thing. Everybody's thinking, I got to get him close to the min, or I got to get him, at least a round or two ahead of his ADP, something like that. But also you have to be aware that other people don't necessarily use the same ADP as you. Like we talk about NFBC ADP as if there's one ADP. There's not, right? Like we've got, especially right now, like when I was drafting for Glarf, I was using online championship ADP from like the last 5 days. Jake was using Draft Champions ADP from like the last 2 weeks. So different people have different time that they put in. And it's like how many drafts makes a big enough sample. You're looking like at like the mins and the maxes. It would be cool if they allowed you to select certain, like if you could combine certain ADPs together instead of just having to pick one. But unfortunately, that's not an option. You only can pick one type of ADP to use. But not everybody uses the same thing. By the time you get to the live mains in Vegas. Generally, people are going to be using the New York main event ADP, but not everybody does. People use different things, and that's kind of why you can't over rely on ADP, but it's still a good base.
And one of the reasons I enjoyed doing the New York main event was because there was no ADP, and it really kind of forced people to kind of base their decisions on what they actually thought, as opposed to, and I know people were using ADPs from online championships and draft champions and things like that, but it was a little bit more of the wild west without any sort of guideposts. What positions or categories do you attack more aggressively in a main than you might in another draft, Dave?
I mean, we all know that the starting pitchers get a pretty big bump. And the closers too. You're not going to find a more aggressive closer draft than a main event. Compared to other formats, other platforms, you're typically able to wait a bit on closers. They're going to get pushed up here. There's going to be runs. Stolen base guys generally get pushed up. I don't know how that's going to go this year. This year is going to be interesting because of the rule changes. I think people feel more than ever that they can get stolen bases more. But as Ben said, if there's more stolen bases, you need to have more of them as well to have a big enough share. But yeah, I think it's really the pitching that gets forced up. And then for me, second base is a problem. Like if I'm not getting a guy early, there's only a couple of spots that I'm really comfortable picking my starting second baseman from. So third base is not great, but for me, second base is more my concern this year. So that's going to be something that I'm probably going to try to attack earlier in the main event compared to other leagues.
What about you, Ben?
Yeah, so position wise, today's point, second, third are weaker this year. But I'd rather make sure I get a strong catcher, at least one good catcher. You can't have two holes in your lineup if you're trying to compete for the main event. You maybe one if you're streaming your catcher two, but you can't have two poor catchers in your lineup. First and short are deepest this year, I think. So you can wait on those. That's kind of why I have Trey Turner pushed down to, I think, 6th of my rankings. Because I'd rather get one of those outfielders first if I can, if I'm drafting up there, or Jose Ramirez like we talked about. But then categories wise, last year one thing I focused on was power. Because the year before I was horrible in power, so I made a point to draft enough homers. That's why I took Yordan last year. It paid off. And then this year, I think I'm going to try to do the same thing. You can't forget about steals, of course. But another thing that I always hear people never talk about is RBIs and runs. People always worry about homers and steals, but when you're taking a first-round hitter, you're getting close to 100 and 100. And that's a huge foundation, especially in the main event overall. Last year in the main, I was there because I was in the top set. I was in the top 5 in homers, runs, and RBIs. So I'm kind of biased, I guess, because of that. But I mean, if you're having a lot of RBIs and runs, you're probably hitting the top of the order, getting more plate appearances. So you probably have more home runs if you're a home run hitter, more steals. So don't forget about RBIs and runs if you're drafting, because if you're in the 20th round in a 15-teamer, guys at that point are projected for like 50 RBIs and runs. So if you buy into projections and you don't have a strong offense to that point, you're kind of in trouble when you're getting to those picks.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think especially runs. I feel like runs is largely ignored by too many smart fantasy players.
Yeah.
And the other thing too,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and then the other two, with pitching, ERA and WHIP, you have to make sure you have to cradle your ERA and WHIP, because if you have one like a Robbie Ray blow up or something like that, it's going to ruin your entire team.
Yeah, that's why I hate streaming pitching, because you can streaming hitters. You're never really destroying. Like, you only have one ratio. Your batting average. You're really never destroying anything. With pitching, you stream the wrong pitcher, and you're really wrecking both your ERA and WHIP, which is 2 categories, and sometimes very difficult to recover from something like that, like a good Austin Gombering with the 9 earned runs in a third of an inning kind of outing. It's just like, holy shit.
Thanks a lot, Nick Pivetta.
Now, Ben, are you a projections guy? Do you when you're figuring out your numbers? Is it based on your own projections, or do you use someone else's projections? What do you do for that?
Yeah, so I bought in projections a couple of years ago. I used to think, how can anyone predict what's going to happen? But it's not the point of them. You'll hear Derek Carr talk about how it's just like a baseline, and or anyone else like Ariel Cohen. They explain it so well. But yeah, as I'm drafting, I use aggregate of Steamer, the Bad X for hitters, and then ATC. I average those together. Simple average, and then I have it set up in my spreadsheet where as I take a player, it adds like my total, and I can see how many the average stats I need for each of my remaining picks, runs, homers, RBIs, and steals. And so as I'm taking players, it's updating automatically, and I'm tracking to see if I need more speed with my next couple of picks, if I'm getting light on runs. So yeah, as I'm drafting, I'm monitoring my team projected totals against the 80th percentiles from this year. I'm going to use a mix of 2020, 2021, 2022 for the main.
Now, do you do this? Do you do this even into like the reserve rounds? Because like, obviously you can't start all these guys. And my whole approach in the last like 10 plus rounds is I'm looking to hit on a big player. Like I'm not so concerned about having like a backup at every position or enough of anything. Like I'd rather have an extra player at a position that I don't necessarily need, but if I feel like he's got a good shot of breaking out, like I want as many hit picks as I can possibly get. It's because the hit rate on your 20 through 30 picks is so low to begin with anyways. Like every year we love our last 10 picks and the hit rate on them is just so fucking low. So like, take shots where you can, don't be conservative and don't worry about, is this guy going to fit in your team? Cause these aren't DCs. These are fab leagues. Like we can pick up stats on the wire that we need. I think it's great to have those targets and everything. I'm not, trying to dissuade anybody from using those. I just think I don't feel like we need to adhere to them super closely, especially towards the end. And especially like once you've got your foundation guys in, like, yeah, you want to make sure, okay, if this is my base, I'm getting enough power, speed, my average is solid. Now I'm just going to take some shots and try to hit on the guys that I'm really into this year. That's how I'm approaching it.
Yeah, I stop after my starting lineup's filled up.
Gotcha. Okay.
But to your point about the high upside, like last year, I didn't fill first base until I drafted Bobby Dahlback.
Yeah.
And then so I'm like, well, I don't know. He's kind of like a flyer. So then I took Rowdy and I took Christian Walker.
Yeah.
And I ended up using those guys instead of Dahlback the whole year. So, I mean, if you're filling a spot late, then you kind of want to back it up right away, I feel like. Because at that point, it's kind of it's a high risk pick anyway. So you don't want to like draft your first baseman last and then kind of sit on it till the end of the draft.
Exactly. Yeah, any risky pick I'm making, whether it's a health risk, whether it's a playing time risk, whether it's a skills risk, I'm backing them up quickly. Like I'm not just taking one guy in the 15th round at third base who I don't feel great about and then waiting until, the 30th round to get another third baseman or ignoring it. Like I'm putting extra emphasis on any place that I feel like I'm taking on extra risk.
How do you approach your draft considering the overall, Ben? Like, are you going into, I mean, obviously this may change now that you've actually competed for the overall this last year, but like, let's say last year, were you entering in going, I'm shooting for the overall, or were you more concerned about your league? And now after competing for an overall, has that changed?
Yeah. So I forget if we talked about this before we started recording after, but I finished 9th my first main event in my league in 2021. Mm-hmm. So going into last year, I just wanted to finish top 3. And I happened to draft the best team of my life instead.
And you finished top 3. You got 3rd overall.
Yeah, 3rd overall.
Yeah. It was my plan all along, right? So the biggest issue, it's not an issue I've had this year, but I don't want to fall into what worked last year going into this year. That's the biggest thing, whether it's taking the same players or the same strategy. Because last year I went hitters first 3 rounds, and that was my idea going into this year because of how pitching was so deep, or it's perceived to be so deep this year. But I don't want to do that just because it worked for me last year. I'm more worried about the stats. Like you have to have to compete, you have to have a ton of everything. If anything, and this is like experience for me, I was short on saves and steals, the 2 most desired categories, it seems like. But because I was strong everywhere else, I was able to stream or just attack those spec closers, and like I fabbed Josh Rojas, he got me steals. So you're not going to be perfect at coming out of the draft. So if you're going to plan to be weak somewhere, okay, fine. But then know that in fab, you have to attack that hard. Or if it turns out where you wanted to be strong in homers and then you're not out of the draft, then you have to change your mindset. Okay, now I have to really be on the lookout for homer guys to start the year. But you have to think about every category with every pick. And that's why those early round hitters are so valuable, because you're getting 5 stats off the bat for the most part. And you get that solid foundation. Then it gives you options as players fall in the ups and the other rounds. And then you have pitching on top of that, which is a whole nother story. But yeah, it's just think of the big picture, and then you have to be able to adjust.
All right, Dave, what do you think is the biggest mistake people make in drafting an overall contest?
I mean, it's the same thing I see every year. It's people thinking you got to go big. It's like you did your first year.
Show off the shirt. You're wearing it 2 weeks in a row. You might as well show it off.
That's right. Yeah, it's the people who think, well, and I see it all the time on Twitter. They're like, well, you got to go big. It's an overall contest. I gotta take all these risks. I gotta, Fernando Tatis in the second, DeGrom in the third. Oh my God, I'm gonna win. And it's like, no, the teams that are gonna win are the teams that make the least amount of mistakes. It's the teams that hit on the most picks. It's the boring teams. It's those are the teams. It's not saying that you shouldn't take shots, but take shots later once you've got your foundation, or take shots on guys who you don't think are as big of a risk as they're perceived. Like for me, that would be like a guy like Chris Sale, where everyone thinks he's this huge risk and I don't. But you can't just take a whole bunch of risky players and think it's going to work, or that's what you have to do to win an overall, because it's not. You're going to be stashing 6 of your 7 bench slots are going to be injured players that you're desperately trying to hold on to. You're going to be taking zeros throughout the week because you don't have a hitter to throw in that week. You're going to be playing shitty streamers for pitchers. You're going to get blown up because you're waiting for DeGrom to come back from his third forearm soreness of the year so far. And it never works to do it that way. You have to manage and balance those risks out.
What about you, Ben? Do you think there's any big mistakes that people in these overall leagues make that kind of prevent them from even kind of getting going in the first place?
Yeah, I agree with what Dave was saying, how the boomer bust, you want those picks later in the draft where you already have your foundation. Because if you have a gaping hole in your team because DeGrom went down first week of the year and he's your second round pick, then it's hard to recover from that. You have to pick up a Kyle Wright or a Spencer Strider to replace that. And everyone's going to be fighting for those pitchers anyway. So it's going to be almost impossible to guarantee you're going to get that. But you want the floor to be as high as possible, I think, in the beginning of your draft. And then as you get farther along, then the floor can start dropping off and then the ceiling goes up higher. So, try to get those sure things early on, I think, and then overall.
Ben, do you have any sort of mantra that has worked really well for you, maybe last year or just in general in playing fantasy? Some of the examples, don't draft early closers, don't pay up for, the scarce categories like stolen bases, roster construction, grab values. What is your mantra at the draft table that's made you successful?
Well, moving from 12 teamers to 15 teamers in FBC, I've had to change a lot over the last couple of years. But the one thing I think that I've always kind of done, and I know other players do this too, that's really valuable, is know who you don't want to draft. Because I think we were talking about before, if someone falls 3 rounds, there's probably a reason why they're falling. If you were out of them in the first place, just don't draft them still. I'd rather miss on someone that I like as opposed to taking someone that I didn't like. It's going to stink either way, but yeah, it's going to make it easier when you're drafting too if you have a smaller player pool to choose from anyway. So,
yeah, I think it's really, really good advice. There's too many times in the past I've drafted. Oh, look, Charlie Blackmon fell to me 3 rounds after ADP, but I going into the draft, I never wanted Charlie Blackmon, but it somehow ended up with him on my team, and now I'm regretting it the rest of the year. So it's definitely something I've tried to adhere to the last couple of years. Dave, what about you? What's your mantra other than never draft a player who's ever been hurt?
Yeah, no. If they got hurt in T-ball in 1984, I'm out. All right.
Yeah.
No, and so
if they were in T-ball in 1984, you definitely should not be drafting them.
That's very true. That's very true. Sorry, 2004. I forget how old I am sometimes.
I was born in 1984, so if someone was playing t-ball, like that's a bad
I know. Yeah, I'm not good at coming up with examples on the fly. Sue me. So my friend Jake from High Stakes Heat with me. Well, when we had a podcast, but he's big on crossing guys off. I cross some guys off, like Ben said. It's good to have a narrower player pool. It's good to cross off the guys who you're just not going to take. Now, sometimes there will be, because even if a guy falls to a point where you'd consider taking them, it's just not worth thinking about. I mean, if you have an overall list, of ADP, you can cross them off as you go, and you can see the guys sitting at the top of the list and reconsider them. But I just think it's easier just to take them off and just don't draft guys that you're not into drafting for whatever reason. So that's I do that a little. Jake does it a lot. He crosses off like damn near half the player pool, or even 2/3 of the player pool. I forget which. I think I cross off closer to like a quarter of the player pool. So the other thing for me is I always try to draft hitters early that give me some stolen bases for at least one of the picks, because I want to get those good hitters that are all around, and I want to keep my team as balanced as possible throughout the draft, because that allows me to take whatever value falls to me in the draft. Because if there's specific things that I need, if I need to get stolen bases, then I'm forcing a guy at a spot that there's maybe a good power hitter falling, and it would be nice to just take the best player that's falling at that time. You can do things like that when you keep yourself balanced throughout the draft. And then, just balancing risks and not in roster construction, making sure that I'm drafting the positions that I need at points where those are when the guys that I like are going. I'm making sure that I'm getting the second baseman early. If that's where I don't like the later second baseman, I'm going to make sure I get him early, and I'm going to push other positions later that I feel like they're deeper. So those are some of the mantras that I use.
What is something that you do differently than other people, Dave, that makes you successful?
I mean, I think a lot of what I just said, honestly, it's just I'm always trying to make sure that I have all the things I need and keeping myself balanced and balancing risks, resources, positions, keeping track of everything. Always being open to new information. I'm never closed-minded. I can be out on someone one moment and change my mind in an instant. I think that's a really good skill to have. It's tough for a lot of people, and a lot of people are like, well, I'm very, they're like, I'm too stubborn to change my mind. You can't be stubborn. If you want to be a good player, you have to be open to constantly changing your mind and be open to new information, maybe something you didn't consider, and go into every discussion and argument you have with someone with that mindset, because it'll make you a better player. If you don't want to change just because someone that you perceive to be a good player, like just because Phil's in on someone, don't be in on them. If someone's in on them, ask them why, figure out what their reasoning is for being in on them, and then go through it on your own and say, does this make sense? And if it does, then cool. Okay, now I'm in on them. But don't be in on someone just because a good fantasy player is in on them. Be strong in your own opinions and do your own research, and it'll work out better for you.
What about you, Ben? What do you do differently than other people that you think has made you successful?
Well, like I mentioned before, how I track my team as I draft. I know not everyone does that. Some people do, but I don't think it's that common. It takes a lot of focusing to do that. You have to be on the top of every pick to make sure you don't miss anybody. So it's definitely tough to do. And the other thing is just thinking about how every pick's going to affect my entire team. Because you kind of get lost in the moment sometimes when you're drafting. Like things are like going so quickly, like a run's happening. You're like, okay, who am I going to take now? There's no more closers left. But just like thinking about going into the draft, okay, where do I see I want to take my shortstop? It's deep, so I can wait, but I can't wait too long. Just having that mindset of looking at the entire draft and just having that big picture, I think, helps me a lot.
With people like, so we've kind of talked about this a little bit earlier with ADP, but like it's so common to see people push guys up their draft boards and going, quote unquote, going and getting their own guys. How do you know who's going to be available to you as your sleeper picks or the guys you want to target late in the draft, considering there's probably other people on those same guys, Ben? Like, how did you do such a good job of like getting those late targets that made you so successful?
You have to be open. Yeah, we have to have a lot of them first because you never know who's going to be in on who. You can try to follow everyone on Twitter and figure out who they're interested in, but it's going to be impossible to figure that all out. But yeah, you just have to be open to getting sniped. Like, you don't want to get sniped. It's going to happen though, no matter who you're drafting with or what sport. But you should have an idea about every player, whether it's positive, negative, a deep dive, or a minimal like piece of information on like your 29th round pick. But you have to be open, like Dave was alluding to earlier, and just be flexible.
What about you, Dave?
I mean, it kind of just depends. I keep track of like I said, the buzz guys. You're gonna hear people, and you're gonna see like some of the early drafts. Even while we're in Vegas, there's drafts before the 11 a.m. main event. See which guys are getting pushed up, which guys are going even earlier than their ADP was. You're gonna have a good idea of who the buzz guys are. Obviously right now, Jordan Walker, Jared Kelenic. Anyone like that, you got to make sure you're taking them probably above their min if you must have them. Like if you've deemed that they're worth where they're going and then some, then take them at a point where it makes sense to take them. I mean, don't throw them up. Don't be taking Jared Kelenic over, a guy who's guaranteed to be good. Don't take him over like, I don't know, Teoscar Hernandez or something. But, take him at a point where maybe sometimes for me it comes down to if there's no one that I love at a draft slot, and of my targets, I'm like, these guys are, there's some guys here that I like, but nobody's jumping out at me. But then there's this other guy who maybe is going like around after this, but I can maybe jump him up here like a Jordan Walker or something. Then I do that. Or sometimes it comes down to team construction. Maybe I'm really into Jordan Walker, but I've already got 2 third basemen or something. I mean, he's going to gain outfield eligibility too, but you know what I'm saying? Like maybe Jordan or Jared Kelenic. Maybe I've already got 4 outfielders. As much as I want to take him here, I'd rather have this other guy, this other sleeper that I'm into because he plays second base and I could use another second baseman. So I think you just kind of have to, you can't get them all. So you got to rank them, which one's more important to your team and which ones you feel stronger about.
Yeah. I'd like to point out that these are all my guys you're mentioning.
Oh, your guys, the guys that are going off in spring training. Yeah, they're just yours, Justin.
They were mine long before spring training.
Wow, you like elite prospects who are going at reasonable draft costs. I can't think of anybody else.
How dare you?
Who's in on those kind of guys?
How dare you minimize this? How are you approaching this year's draft, Dave? Power was down last year. Stolen bases were more prevalent, and we're expecting them to be even more prevalent this year.
Yeah.
Will you be focusing on like extra power this year? What kind of pitchers do you want to target? What are you focusing on for your draft prep right now, considering what we're like 2 weeks away from our main event in Vegas?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Last year kind of scared me into things that I would have never drafted early power only guys ever. It was always about getting those steals early because power was always prevalent throughout the draft. Ben picked a hell of a year to go after power hitters last year. Like could not have timed it any better. The rest of us were avoiding power hitters because there's always the 25 to 30 homer guys that we can take in like the 15th round, like literally every year, but not last year. There was no power on the wire. It was extremely difficult to find because we don't know with the humidors, with the dead ball. I have no idea what ball do we have this year. Does anybody know? I don't fucking know. So I'm not going to get caught, with my hand down my pants. I'm going to make sure that I've got, my power early. So I'm going to make sure, try to take as many of those balance guys as possible who can give me power and speed. I do feel like I can build. I feel like the information on pitching has evolved so much, like what's out there, with Nick Pollock and pitcher list stats and just in general StatCast. We know kind of pitcher skill levels now. So it's a little easier for me to be confident in my starting pitchers picks in terms of skill levels. So I do feel better about waiting, doing what Ben said, taking those hitters early. Then maybe I'm going to probably put a lot of depth into my rotation, but I might not start my rotation until round 4 or 5. So I think that's what I'm going to do is get that power and speed early, then just hit pitching hard and make sure I'm getting I want to have a good rotation filled out. I don't want to have guys that are questionable streamer type guys in my starting rotation. So I'm going to make sure that I put a lot of depth in there.
What about you, Ben?
Yeah, a lot of the same points Dave made. I really want to hit her first round. In TGFBI, I put the 15th pick as my first choice because I wanted to try drafting at that turn. And I went pocket aces. I went Cole and Burns just to see how it would play out. And it's been interesting. It's been not comfortable because it's the opposite of what I've been doing my other drafts up to this point. I waited on steals, and I'm not paying for it really yet. It's still kind of early in the draft, but it's going to be to that point where you're like, maybe I have to draft Mondesi. I don't want to do that, but I need steals. So definitely try to get a 5-category contributor early. I'm more open this year, so I kind of fell into Yordan last year. He wasn't a target. I mean, like I was willing to take him last year, but if I'm picking maybe 13th, I'll go for like a Bo Bichette if he falls, and then like an Austin Riley. Just 2 stud hitters that are going to be close to 200 runs, 200 RBIs.
I like that.
A lot of homers, some steals, good average, just getting that base, and then kind of going into that second tier of starters because with my starters, any ding on them, I'm going to be nervous. Like I had McClanahan last year, so like I owe him almost, but I don't want to take him at all this year.
No.
I don't trust his shoulder.
Yep.
Same thing with Strider, like the workload issue. He had the injury last year, 2 pitches. Like he's great, but I don't know if I can trust him to hold up for the entire year. DeGrom's definitely a no.
What about Rodon?
So guys like that. I was in on him until the 92 mile per hour readings. So I don't know how he's going to bounce back in his next start. But for some reason, I don't know, like it's 2 years in a row and he could always like at any point just get hurt again. But guys like Nola and Woodruff, I had pretty high in my rankings. They were like 3rd and 4th for me when I first made my pitcher ranks. Just because of the perceived safety, at least with those guys. I'm more like I had Max Fried last year. I like Max Fried. He's kind of safe, but then you have to get the K's but that's the strategy though. If I take Max Fried, I have to probably go for another starter next pick just to like bolster up with that second tier of starters, So you have to have that game plan. And then in terms of pitching still, I kind of want to have 5 starters by pick 200. I think once you get past 200, it's kind of a big drop off in the quality. Whether it's injury risk or guys who did poorly last year. So I got kind of lucky last year waiting on starters in the main event. I ended up getting Michaelis and Perez and someone else, and I kind of stuck with them the entire year, but I can't bank on that this year. So I might try to attack pitching a little bit more this year.
Yeah, I don't think you necessarily have to attack it like in the first 2 or 3 rounds even. I just think you have to make sure you're getting enough of those guys, like you said before, to pick 200 or wherever you deem the drop-off is. And just keep in mind, in ADP for main events, those guys are all pretty much going to be going earlier than their ADP. And I thought of another mantra that I forgot about before that kind of goes with the Rodon thing. I don't like drafting guys coming off of monster seasons, especially if they're not like a young player. Like when you're talking about like Julio Rodriguez, that's fine because I think he's a stud who's only going to be, not necessarily getting better, but pretty much staying around that talent level. With Rodon, I don't like drafting guys coming off of a monster year like that who previously had not been able to stay healthy, and then all of a sudden they're healthy and their value pretty much depends on staying that way. I always go off those guys. Like when Soler had that monster year, the next year I was like, nope, I'm all off Soler, and everybody drafted him early, and then he was hurt again and never came close to that production again. What do you have? 48 home runs that year, 2019, I think. Yeah, you just drafting guys at their high watermark ADP wise, especially if they're not like a young stud prospect. Well, not prospect, but young stud player on the rise. I don't want any part of them at that ADP because they're usually overvalued because basically they're at the peak of where their career is, and they're probably not going to be back there again.
Isn't Rodon though coming off of 2 monster years in a row? Like, I mean, he was a monster in 2021 too. He threw less innings, but like, I mean, he had a sub-3 ERA and a 30% strikeout rate. Like, he was still a monster in 2021.
I mean, It's fine. I'm not doing it.
I totally like you have like you don't have to like say like, oh well that makes it like okay, but like I think health aside, like I think he's just a monster. Like I think
but health is certainly a reason.
And I think that's an argument not to have him. Like I vacillated. Like the difference between me putting him at like 170 innings and putting him at 150 innings is the difference between like 5 or 6 or 8 spots in my starting pitcher ranks. Like it's the difference between whether or not I'm going to get him. So like, I mean, I don't think people realize like those 20 innings, extra 20 innings, like make a massive difference for a guy, especially like Yordan. And so like, I totally understand. Like if you don't think he's going to get that extra 20 innings or he may throw less than that, then you probably shouldn't draft him.
Yeah. And I mean, if you do draft Yordan, just make sure you're drafting other guys that are, kind of safer for innings and stuff like that. It's just balancing your risk. But personally, it's just not where I'm going to go.
And I haven't drafted him. Like I haven't pulled the trigger on him, largely because I am worried that like his health risk is just a little bit higher than a lot of other guys who are going there. And like Ben mentioned earlier, and I think we've talked about a lot about this kind of draft season, is we draft for floor early on. Like we want a safe return on our high picks in terms of our investment there. Ben, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a fantastic episode.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It was an honor, and I never take it for granted whenever I'm asked to come on a podcast. And it was great meeting you guys virtually.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. Remind everybody again where you can reach on social media, and if you've got anything to plug, you're more than welcome to plug it.
Yeah, so on Twitter, my handle is BreakingBen_T, and I do not write for anyone, or I'm not an analyst at all. I'm just your average Joe, so that's all my stuff's right there.
Now, do you want to work for someone? Is that something you want to do, or are you just a player?
For now as a player, I've always thought about it. Like before I even knew what the NFBC was, I might be like, it'd be cool to do this one day, for like a living, or just to do it. But maybe one day, I don't know.
Well, talk to Justin about that, and Justin's wife sometime about that, about all that goes into doing it for a living.
I gave him a little preview before the episode started.
Okay. He was complaining about it. I'm like, okay, I'm good.
Really, Justin complaining about it? That doesn't sound familiar at all.
As soon as this episode's over, I'm gonna write 2 articles before my next podcast at 11. So,
by the way, did you see I just looked in the chat right now. Greg said, "Does Justin develop film between picks?"
Yeah. At some point, I will be painting this office back to white. So that way, it doesn't reverberate orange. Dave, where can you be reached? What are you not working on?
Yeah, that would be at RunDMCD. Add that D on Twitter. And I'm just working on getting ready for the main event, man. It's crunch time. And all my other drafts, honestly. I'm looking into picking my my draft times for my fan tracks and Yahoo leagues here too. So it's kind of always a stressful time, is trying to figure out when I can do all this and still work and research, get all that done. So and then also I'm just trying to make sure all of the Earth leagues get off the ground here and draft and everything goes smoothly and everything. So just a lot to think about right now.
You can reach me on Twitter at Mason FWFB. Email me or the show, friendsoffantasybenefits@gmail.com. I'm running daily fan graphs pretty much daily right now at Fantasy Pros as well. And I'm on Sleeper on the Bus podcast. TGFBI podcast just relaunched this last week. Barf is this weekend. That's going to be a ton of fun. And Dave and I will be sure to talk about my Barf draft and his Glarf draft next Monday. So if you're interested in kind of hearing the breakdowns of those, that is what is on tap for next week. Also, we'll be giving away another free t-shirt. Run a little bit late tonight, so I'm not going to do it tonight, but I will do it on an upcoming episode. That will wrap us up for this episode for Ben, Dave, and myself. Thanks for listening. Have a fantastic baseball season.